cardiovascular exercise. We talked about the role of something called the endothelium. You have it. It's very important in keeping this at bay. Talked about why the endothelium is a critical component in the cardiovascular system. We also talked about some guidelines for those looking to prevent these issues or possibly slow the progression of the disease. All of that was covered in week number 1. If you would like a recorded link to that webinar, we're making it available. Simply ask. We'll show you at the end of this how you can get a copy of that link. There's some really, really good information in all of these. We recommend that if you have not gotten your copy of the link, contact us by the sometime this week. We'll go ahead and put it in your hands. Week number 2 was a really good one. Last week, if you missed it, you're definitely going to want to get a copy of this. We talked about the link between DHA fats and Alzheimer's disease. What the heck are DHA fats? We covered that. It's the most cognitive impairment is not age-related. That's some pretty startling stuff in there. The most cognitive impairment is not age-related. That's one of the things that we discussed last week. You did notice that as you're coming in, I am putting you on mute. We want to keep the audio quality as good as we can. We talked about the fact that we must get DHA fats from our diets because the human body cannot synthesize them. DHA fats are important, and you cannot get them from the human body. We talked about dietary fish oil as an anti-inflammatory. We talked about things like gray matter. We spent a good amount of time on a research study by the Department of Psychiatry at the University of Pittsburgh. Danielle, our guest tonight, talked about that. It was really fascinating science, research-based science on Alzheimer's. And then we talked about a company called Nordic Naturals and their Omega supplement line. Great, great products. If you weren't on last week, ask for a recorded link to that webinar. We'll get it. It had some really good information. For those of you that are coming in, and I can see that the room is filling quickly, I want to thank you before we get to our guest. Thank you for your time tonight. We're going to make it worth your while. We're going to give you some information tonight concerning what we call the exercise effect, which is the relationship between movement, exercise, and Alzheimer's disease. What is that relationship? How does exercise affect it? And how can you keep Alzheimer's disease at bay? So sit tight. And I also talked about there are chat features on the bottom. You do have a question for us. Go ahead and chat it in. We'll try to get it answered tonight. So that's what we covered the first 2 weeks. Let's get to our special guest speaker. If this is your first time in, you are going to love this lady 30 minutes from now. Many of you know Danielle Giordano. She has accolades that we don't have enough computer space to put on here. Advisory boards, yeah, she's on the fitness advisory boards for the Cooper Institute, the Cardiovascular Wellness in Chicago, the First Responders for Fitness, also on their medical advisory board. And she has plenty of noteworthy honors. She was named one of the 2013 top 40 under 40 by the Dallas Business Journal. She was a finalist in the Chicago Innovation Awards for 2013. How about St. Jude Research Hospital? Yep, she's on the advisory board of the Sunday of Hope Project. You probably know her as the president of Define Sculpting and Nutrition, a great, great company that helps so many people stay healthy, accomplish their dreams. And she's on the board of directors for the Alzheimer's Cure. If we can unmute her for a second here, we can say welcome to Danielle Giordano. Danielle, can you hear us?
I absolutely can. How are you doing this evening, Steve?
I'm doing excellent. How are you? You're coming in loud and clear.
Well, you know, they always say that I'm a loudmouth Yankee, so I've never had a problem coming in loud and clear.
Well, I mentioned a word that you are a specialist in, exercise. And tonight we're obviously going to be talking about what we call the exercise effect and Alzheimer's disease. And if you don't mind, we should probably just go ahead and get right into it. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. This is, I got to tell you, out of the 3 webinars in this series, this is the one that I've really been looking forward to because I'm absolutely so passionate about Alzheimer's disease. I know I had mentioned before that it's something that I faced firsthand with my own family members. And it's something that, I'm very conscious and I'm at risk of. And so taking steps to try and avoid this just very devastating disease is something that is first and foremost in my mind, and that's why I hooked up with such a dramatic and just trailblazing group as the Alzheimer's Cure Foundation. I know we're going to talk about them a little bit more, but what a great group, and I thank them for sponsoring this great series as well, too.
And Danielle, for some of the people that may be joining us for the first time, week number 1, we actually talked about Alzheimer's disease is not just something that you hear about. I mean, the dollar figure as far as care and the havoc this disease reaps is in the billions worldwide.
Yes, absolutely. And our healthcare system, in the United States is absolutely out of control. And these are one of those diseases that you can take steps. You don't have to just be a victim and put your hand up. And it's knowledge is power. And I'm a huge advocate of knowledge being power. And once you have it, nobody can ever take it away from you. So I'm passionate about education and getting this word out and trying to spare families and individuals from just the the traumatic effect that this disease has on the ripples that it sends out of all the family as well as the victim themselves.
Well, let's get to some of the questions we have here. I have a slide that's up on the screen, and it's obviously not to celebrate Halloween. It's obviously the muscular system. And one of the questions that we hear all the time, people say, we all know that exercise is important for general health. There's no denying that. But how does exercise positively affect those with Alzheimer's or any kind of cognitive impairment disease?
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that in the first week we specifically talked about cardiovascular disease, and tonight, we're really going to concentrate on that anaerobic part of exercise, and that is building new muscle tissue and really trying to present here what the connection is between Alzheimer's and new muscle that can be built, new muscle tissue. So I wanted to kind of get to the basics here because there's a lot of misconceptions out there, and I want to make sure that everybody's on the same page, especially if they want to chat in some questions. I just want to make sure we kind of go over some fundamentals here. So first is volume. So when you're talking about volume of muscle tissue, you're actually talking about the amount of area that the muscle tissue covers. Now, this is different from mass that you see directly underneath. Mass, the best way to think of that is really how thick or how dense the tissue is. The third one on the list, endurance. Endurance really, it's something that's synonymous with marathon runners and, century ride cyclists and people of that nature. But when you use endurance, when you're talking about the muscle tissue itself, you're talking about the ability of the tissue to utilize oxygen and repetitive movements and how well can it do that. Then, of course, you have strength, and sometimes people throw strength around. Well, the actual definition of strength is the absolute ability to move that muscle, a force working against it. Now, of course, here on Earth, that's gravity. That gravity is the one that works against us. And you might remember from way back in 7th grade biology, the actual definition of work is being able to forcefully push something against gravity. So, I just wanted to make sure that we talked about those 4 things, and we're all on the same page as we talk about the muscle tissue tonight in detail. That everybody understands. And then, of course, the amount of muscles that are in the human body, there's 682 total. Many of those muscles go how can we say, unspotlighted. Everybody knows the biceps, and everybody knows the quads, or the abdominals, or the chest muscles, the pec muscles. But there's actually 682 in total. And this next slide here, I really wanted to make sure that people had an understanding. I think that, like when you talk about the gluteus maximus, the gluteus maximus isn't just a, for lack of a better term, a rump roast on the back there. The gluteus maximus is actually broken down into 6 different segmented parts. And I wanted to bring in here the bone tissue. What exactly is a tendon? What does a tendon look like? Of course, we hear when people have tears or people have injuries that require reparative surgery. What does that actually look like? How is muscle connected to the bone? And then, of course, the muscle tissue itself. It's not just one piece of tissue. It is thousands of different pieces of tissue that come together to form that bicep or that quad or that pec or what have you. So I wanted to make sure that everybody just kind of had a visual here as we go forward on what exactly these things are. We're not just throwing around these terms.
Well, that's pretty interesting. This is not just a basic lump of flesh that you just stretch and work. It's actually a very intricate, ornate part of the body.
No, it absolutely is. And you know, one of the things that a lot of people know, maybe not everyone, but there's basically two types of fibers into the body. There's fast twitch fibers, which is basically your explosive strength movement. So when you talk about, I don't know, you talk about football players, right? It is a very difficult sport. It's a high contact sport, but think about it. They snap the ball, there's a play for about 35, 45 seconds, and then you rest. And then you snap the ball, and then you have another play and rest. You have to be able to be very, very quick to get to the ball or make the tackle or make the catch or get to the end zone or whatever it may be. Slow twitch fibers, on the other hand, these are really those endurance fibers. This is really the endurance movement. So if we're talking in relation to sports, consider slow twitch soccer players. They can go minutes and minutes and minutes on end. And there is no whistle, there is no timeout, there is no, you know, they have to be able to go a very long period of time without stopping. Now, all of us have these fibers in our body naturally. Everybody has fast twitch, everybody has slow twitch. The difference is some of us naturally have more fast twitch, and some of us naturally have more slow twitch. This is a natural differentiation between an endurance athlete and an athlete like a football player or somebody who's maybe doing pole vaulting or something like that, where it needs to be a very explosive action, but it's a very short duration of time. Now, the other point that I want to make with this particular slide is the actual tissue itself. And I love this slide because it really breaks down what muscle tissue looks like. Now, many people know that I'm from Pittsburgh, and of course Pittsburgh is the city of bridges, more bridges than any other city in the entire world. And I think it's a really great analogy. You know, when you look at the actual structure of a bridge and the iron ties that actually hold a bridge together, there are thousands and thousands of very, very thin individual steel wires that they bind together in kind of these little, how can I say, little wrapped, little smaller segments, little wrapped smaller segments. And those smaller segments get wrapped into another large bundle. And that large bundle becomes, every layer becomes stronger. And then, of course, you braid all of these larger ones together, and that's how you actually get the steel strap that holds up hundreds of thousands of pounds at one time, of course, because there's many, many of those wraps that are all together. And that's a great way to think of the muscle tissue. There's a lot of foundation here. There's a lot of very intricate variables to the muscle tissue, but it all has to work together, and it works as a team. And I know that we're going to talk about motor units in detail as we go forward, but really understanding that there's different segments to that muscle tissue, and within those segments of muscle tissue, there's specialties. You know, there's people that are good at this, there's people that are good at that, and that's just a good way to understand it for a visual.
Well, you had mentioned earlier that some people have more fast twitch, some slow. Is it genetic, or is that something that people can work on and develop, or both?
Well, it absolutely is genetic. You are born, whatever your genetics happen to be, you're naturally going to be born with one or the other. Now, does that mean that just because somebody is born, you know, with one set of muscle fibers and they always wanted to be a marathon runner, that they can never do that and they can't condition them for that? Well, of course not, because, you know, running is such a popular sport here in the United States and abroad. Or if you look at cycling worldwide, it's an immensely popular sport. Well, just because you're born with one doesn't mean that you can't condition them. What it does mean is when you get into elite athletes, and we're talking about, you know, Olympians, and you're talking about people who play in the World Cup for soccer, or people who play in the NFL or the National Hockey League, these are people who a tenth of a second, a hundredth of a second, could make all the difference in the world. So it's really not until you get to that upper echelon that it makes a real big difference. For the everyday person, having a little bit more of the slow twitch or the fast twitch isn't going to impact their daily life. Now, interestingly, motor units. So you have to picture motor units as kind of the generals in the Army, right? if anybody out there is a military person, you know that whenever you go to march into battle, there's different segments, right? I mean, you have a platoon leader, and then maybe you have a battalion leader, and then maybe you have a sergeant, and forgive me if I'm getting this incorrect, but eventually you kind of get to the general, okay? So for our purposes tonight, I want us to think of the general as the brain. The general is the absolute, sending every single order that comes down is coming from the brain. These motor units are kind of like the sergeants on the ground. So when Army is on the ground, a sergeant can only handle so many individual privates, right? I mean, if you get too many, you're going to miss something here, or somebody's going to go askew, or your orders aren't going to be carried out, or something is not going to happen properly. That is a great, great analogy for motor units. What motor units do is they control small groups of these muscle fibers, but they can only control so many. Now, in each person, it could vary. You know, maybe one person, or maybe one motor unit in one person can, you know, they can keep an eye over 1,200 individual fibers. Maybe another motor unit and that exact same person in a different area of the body can only handle 500 individual strands. The point is the more muscle tissue you build, the body is forced to create more motor units simply because it has to be able to control the functionality of the muscle. It's just like when you go to drink some water out of a water bottle. Well, whenever you go to drink that water out of the water bottle, the brain has to send a signal down through the central nervous system, which, of course, the brain is a part of, along with the spinal cord, which you see pictured here. It has to send a message to get the bicep to contract, right? And a lot of people get muscle memory incorrectly. And if I could just take about 30 seconds, muscle memory isn't, oh, when I was a high school athlete, I could bench 450 pounds, and don't worry, my muscle memory will come back, even though it's 30 years later, and you know the gentleman maybe 55 or 60 years old, or whatever it may be. That's not what muscle memory is. Muscle memory is the brain sending the signals down to these little motor units. And these motor units remembering that if I pick up a bottled water, that's going to weigh a lot less than picking up a 100-pound dumbbell. So if I'm sending that signal down, I only really need to maybe get one motor unit group on board, or maybe two on board, versus if I am picking up that 100-pound weight, my muscle memory, the signals that are being sent through the neurons in the brain coming down through the central nervous system of the spine to these motor units are going to say, hey guys, we need every single one of y'all on the bicep to contract and to move. That's what muscle memory is. And that's going to play a very significant role, as you see as we go on to the further slides, those signals that are coming from the brain and the pathways that those signals take. So motor units are very important.
So people right now should have that little light bulb that's starting to go off above their head. And you may be thinking, aha, I didn't know exactly where we were going with all of the nerves and this biology lesson, but now you're starting to see the big picture. We're talking tonight about the exercise effect, the effect of physical exercise and Alzheimer's disease. And one of the main areas, this relationship between the two, comes down to motor units. Tell us more about this, Danielle.
Well, and basically this slide here, the reason why I like this particular one is it gives you a real good visual of kind of the downward motion, right? Because as humans, we tend to think of things, you know, from the left to the right, or from the top to the bottom. And so this is a real good way for people to kind of get a visual here. So basically it's, hey, I want to pick up that bottled water. And the brain says, hey, okay, we're going to pick up that bottled water. It's going to send the signal down through those neurons into this, you know, several different sections of the brain, finally going down through the spinal cord. That spinal cord is then going to send that message through the branches of nerves. And, you know, as anybody knows, there's thousands and thousands of nerve endings that we could talk about. But for the sake of our discussion tonight, we're just going to kind of clump them all into one group and just make the association that as the signal comes from the brain down through the spinal cord, it goes out through the nerve endings within the spinal cord, and then those nerve endings are going to branch out actually to that muscle tissue. This is where those motor units come into play. those nerves are going to be connected directly into the motor units. You know, just like when people say, you know, if you have a very, very hard workout, and we talk about this in physiology classes, you have a very, very hard workout and you get micro tears in the muscle. Well, micro tears in the muscle, sometimes people will shake, or you know, they'll either get the shakes when they're just, you know, standing with nothing, or while they're actually trying to do a contraction, they'll get shakes, or they get something that we call the phenomenon. You know, I feel like I'm lifting, but, you know, my legs aren't lifting, or, you know, it feels like my arms are bending, but they're really not. What that is when you get those micro tears inside of the muscle tissue, it's almost like the bridge is being washed out. Okay, so you consider that nerve signal, that signal that's being sent from the brain is coming down, it's going through those nerve endings, and then it's trying to get to the motor unit, right? Well, even if it does get to the motor unit, if we have micro tears in the muscle, it can't send that message out to the entire muscle because there's been a break. The bridge has been washed away. The truck cannot get the message sent to the other half of the muscle. And so you get either a shaking, which is basically the nerve ending trying to force the signal through. And of course, you know, there's several diseases that we can talk about too that are degenerative diseases with the nervous system itself and the nerve endings that would cause similar reactions. But of course, we know that this is temporary. Same thing with having that phenomenon of, well, my legs are lifting, aren't they? And no, they're still on the ground, you know. And that's the brain is thinking that it's sending that message. It's thinking it's sending that message, but that message isn't actually getting to all of those muscle fibers. So again, if we're trying to lift, say you're doing a leg press and you're trying to lift, say, you know, a few hundred pounds or something, and you're trying to push it up, well, the brain says, I'm sending that signal, but the signal isn't recruiting all of those motor units. So the motor units cannot then send it out to the individual fibers to contract. Does that kind of make it a little clearer?
Absolutely. That's perfectly clear. It makes perfect sense. So let me ask you a question. What types of exercise, since we are talking about Alzheimer's, what types of exercise, in your opinion, are recommended for those with cognitive impairment?
Well, building new muscle tissue is so crucial, okay, because, so you see a picture here of the neurons inside of the brain, okay, and the neurons are those groups of, say they're kind of the general's right-hand men, right? And they're the ones that are sending the messages between each other, okay? Now you can see on the left-hand side, this would be considered a healthy neuron pattern. Over on the right-hand side, this is what an Alzheimer's neuron pattern would look like. Now you're going to see a few differences there. One, you're going to see there's not as many of those little pods, those little neurons. There's not as many of them. You're also going to see that the individual branches that are coming off seem a little bit thinner, and there's just less of them that are going to be there. The last thing that you're going to see is down in the right-hand corner of that right-hand side, the diseased neurons, you're going to see something that we call tangles. Okay, and tangles are basically degeneration of these neuron endings. So you remember when I had said that when you build new muscle tissue, the body is forced to make more motor units. You remember our whole analogy of, well, you know, there's only so many people that the sergeants or the battalion leaders can handle. There's only so many privates they can handle. Well, it's the identical same thing with these neurons. The only difference is the neurons, now the privates, are those motor units. So in order to keep sending the signals back and forth, those pathways have to stay healthy. They have to find new patterns, new paths to take. You know, ironically, in psychology, they talk about behavioral patterns, and this is an excellent example. It goes hand in hand. They're like cousins to physical movement. So if you picture a forest, a big, dense, deep forest, okay, the first time you ever walk from the front of that forest to the back of that forest, it's going to be pretty difficult. There's trees down, there's brush, you've got to step over things, you're going to be slow going through there, knocking things around to try and make a path. Well, when you come back through, it'll be just a little bit easier, because you might remember where that hole was, or where that big stump was, or where that low-hanging branch was. Transversely, the more you go back and forth and you walk that same path, what ends up happening? You start to actually beat back the grass, right? The bushes are starting to be pushed back. All of a sudden, you become much faster. So when you create more motor units, because you're creating more lean tissue, and the more fibers you have, the more motor units you have to have, the brain is forced to find new pathways. And the pathways that it has, it's forced to send those signals back and forth faster. What does this do? This keeps the brain tissue active. This keeps the brain tissue functioning at a very high level. This forces these little neurons to create more of those little branches. You see those branches on the left-hand side that kind of look like veins? Those are pattern waves. So it forces them to make more of those, and the ones that it has become stronger. This leads to cognitive reasoning, being able to have faster thought patterns. This is keeping the cells healthy. And lastly, when we were talking about endothelial cells, you remember we talked about endothelial cells that are particularly in the brain. This is carrying blood. This is keeping oxygen going. The more activity that is there in the brain, the more oxygen that is needed by the brain. As a matter of fact, when we had talked, we said that it was in excess of 20% of the overall oxygen of the body is actually used by the brain. It's not the heart or the lungs. It's actually used by the brain. Glucose, one of the main components that our body needs glucose for, the brain needs it. That's the energy for the brain. And once you understand this concept, all of a sudden it becomes full circle. It becomes, okay, if I'm doing physical activity, not only am I stimulating those positive endorphins, but I'm also forcing the brain to create new patterns. And so in this last slide here, you know, I really wanted to give people kind of an overall visual. So basically, your brain is your information center. It's saying, yes, we need to send this particular message to this particular part of the body, right? Like if you're doing a squat or if you're doing a bicep curl, I need to send this message to this particular part of the brain, right? So it's going to send it down into that mechanical system, okay? That mechanical system is going to create movement. It's going to create functionality. As you come back up, it's going to have that feedback. Just like I was saying with the phenomenon of, are my legs moving? And they're really not. Well, that's that feedback that's coming back. Well, I feel like I'm moving, but I'm not really moving at all. Then you see that we have this lateral push to the sensatory system. That goes to that shaking that I was talking about. And then also just the stimulation that's happening of those fibers that are inside the body. I mean, you hear of people who, you know, unfortunately they, you know, might have accidents, or there might be something that drastically reduces or negates their physical movement, and their muscles become atrophied. You hear that term being thrown around a lot. Well, you have to stimulate, you know, just, you know, whenever you work with somebody who's had any kind of a brain injury or a stroke or something of this nature, one of the things that you're taught is you stimulate the large muscles. So if you're doing a leg contraction, you're going to actually massage very, very quickly that quad muscle. Why? Because that's stimulation within the muscle. That's helping that signal get back and forth. And so, you know, you go back to then the sensory feedback that comes back around, whether that is I completed that repetition if I'm doing that bicep curl or I'm doing that leg press. Now I know, okay, now I'm going back into the movement again to complete the second repetition. And it's just amazing to me when you look at it, and you know, if anybody, I would implore them to either my LinkedIn page or my bio, or my, excuse me, on the website, my bio page, you'll see that I have several different types of credentials that are in dementia and working with people with dementia. And it just astonishes me the kind of progress that you can make with folks and getting that extra oxygen into the brain and forcing this extra activity. Steve, it's amazing, and that's why I'm so passionate about this. People need to understand this. They need to know this and start implementing it. So, you know, when you talk about senior fitness and you talk about people that are in their 50s or their 60s or their early 70s, This isn't about being a size 2 or a 4 or 6 anymore. This is about true longevity. This is about true quality of life, being able to enjoy the life that's there. And that's why I'm so adamant about seniors having, you know, anaerobic activity or building muscle tissue or resistance training. Besides the fact you get those great endorphins, besides the fact that it helps your bone tissue become more dense, besides the fact that it's going to make you stronger overall, so falls and slips might not be as, how can we say, life-changing for some people. When they break a hip, it starts a spiral, and I'm in all seriousness, and it's amazing what the body can do, and if you just give your body the right tools, what it can do.
Well, let's talk about some of these things. And again, are there any particular types of exercises that will stimulate the muscle that will directly affect Alzheimer's in the body?
Well, I mean, absolutely. I mean, doing mid-weight is what we would call it, resistance training. So in other words, this isn't us trying to, you know, max out every time, or someone who has dementia. You certainly don't want to do that, or someone who might be in danger of that. You want to do something that's like mid-level, and sometimes the rep counts, and again, this is all based on the individual, so please, if I have the disclaimer here that this is a very general piece of advice that I'm throwing out here, you'd really want to start with a higher repetition count. So you'd want to stay at like a 15, 17, 20, or a 17, 20, 25, something like that. Again, because you're trying to stimulate that muscle tissue, you're trying to facilitate that oxygen and get that blood moving. Any type of resistance exercise that you and I would do, Steve, from a bicep curl to, you know, doing a quad exercise or doing a squat, just because your hair is a little bit silver doesn't mean that you can't do these things anymore. It just means that you need to go about it a little bit differently. So I would encourage people, you know, have a day that you do biceps, have a day that you do chest, have a day that you do your lower legs, have a day you do your upper legs. Concentrate on your triceps. Let your back be worked. You know, don't get bored. There's way too many exercises out there to be bored. And as much as I'm an absolute advocate of cardiovascular exercise, you cannot forget about the anaerobic, and you cannot forget about building new muscle tissue, because this I truly feel is the last piece of the puzzle, and that's why I was, you know, really wanted to do this particular topic last. I really think it brings everything all together and full circle, and yeah, so I'm sorry, I guess I took the long way around that, but I get so enthralled.
I kind of have a follow-up question on that. God forbid we know somebody with Alzheimer's, and let's say we contact you and you come up with a specific tailored plan for that person, and we implement it. How long can it take to actually see some benefits from somebody who's suffering from Alzheimer's or any form of cognitive impairment?
Well, I mean, the first question that you have to ask is, what stage of Alzheimer's is the person in, or do they just have some sort of cognitive degeneration? I think that's the very first question you have to ask. Now, as anybody knows who's worked with Alzheimer's patients, when you get into the latter stages of Alzheimer's, and this is kind of what that University of Pittsburgh study was talking about that we referenced last week, there's moods, there's outbursts, there's things like this that happen. Obviously, those type of people you don't want to give weights to. I mean, these are not the type of people that I'm going to give a 5-pound dumbbell to, because the chances that there might be some sort of an outburst and somebody becoming hurt or them hurting themselves is great. So those are the type of people that, you know what, we might work with a ball, you know, like an empty air-filled ball, which you can do many, many things with. Maybe we do the bands. Maybe we just work on activities of daily living and range of motion, but range of motion with resistance to it. The point is that the person who is working with that Alzheimer's patient needs to keep control of the situation. Now, people who are in very early stage Alzheimer's, these are people that I would recommend get them to the gym. Get them, call a trainer, get them to the gym. You know, my information is going to be here at the end. Reach out. Get them started on some sort of resistance training, even if they're having some sort of cognitive decline. get them in, get them moving, start building some of that tissue back up, force the body, essentially, I hate to say heal itself because Alzheimer's doesn't have a cure per se, but you get out of the way of the body and let the body naturally try and take care of itself. So I recommend them getting them to the gym. I recommend, go spend some time with them and, go do a couple of chest presses, and get active, get that body in motion.
And Danielle, I got a question here, says, are there other benefits specifically for those with cognitive issues?
Well, yeah, I mean, absolutely. And again, I'll allude back to our other webinars. The more oxygen that you can get into the brain, the more that you can nourish those endothelial cells that are in the brain, the better it's going to be. Again, the brain uses glucose and oxygen. That's its primary functioning fuels, if that's the best way for me to say it. So absolutely, getting that extra oxygen up into the brain. The moods, one of the very first things that you're going to notice, and this kind of hooks back into the question you asked prior, one of the very first things that you notice is the moods are increased. They're improved. You don't get as many of those emotional outbursts. Again, alluding back to the University of Pittsburgh study, you get these natural endorphins that are being fired off and being absorbed, and that can change the hormone makeup, and for the better, of course, is what I'm alluding to here. But absolutely, getting more oxygen to the brain, mood improvement, and just being able to do something, and confidence levels. When somebody is diagnosed with this disease, Alzheimer's, it's like being told you have, HIV, or you have cancer, or you have some other, it's like a life sentence, and you feel like you're going to be losing any kind of functionality. Just for someone to be able to complete a workout, which might seem like the most simplistic thing, that's confidence. That's giving somebody back a piece of their self-esteem. Their balance is going to tend to get better. Their equilibrium is going to tend to get better as well, on top of the moods. And of course, you have the bone density that's going to improve. Osteoporosis used to be a women's issue. Now more men are getting osteoporosis than women. But there's several different benefactors. And if you can exercise outside, obviously getting the vitamin D, and there's countless studies that you can look at that point to the effects of getting that natural sunlight and what that does to stimulate moods.
Well, folks, you know where we're going to go here. There's actually 3 chairs that you can sit in. One is you can just be a bystander and say, that's interesting, and go on with your normal life. Number 2, you can be part of the problem. Nobody wants to be that. Or you can be part of the cure. So let's talk about the Alzheimer's Cure Foundation. I know you have a strategic partnership with those people. And guys, if you want to get in contact with them, here's their website, alzcure.org. Or definitely check out their Facebook page, Facebook at ALZCure. We get some great information. How did you get teamed up with this organization? And tell us a little bit about it.
Well, the Alzheimer's Cure Foundation is just, it is a group of people who are committed to finding a cure. These are people who are committed to having a happy ending for so many people. I'm pretty sure that every single person involved in this foundation has been touched by this illness, because truly until you're personally touched by it, there's nothing that you can put into words that describes what you go through. Sincerely trailblazing and innovative in the fact that their end goal is to raise funds through donations, which I do hope everyone does take a moment, whether it's $5, whether it's $500, to say thank you for putting these great webinar series on. Their goal is to have an end for the person or for the group who does find a cure for Alzheimer's, and to have that there as a, and I hate to use the word prize, but and it is, when you look at coming up with a cure for something like Alzheimer's, clinical trials can go for years and years and years, and you could literally spend an entire career trying to isolate one very small segment or portion of how to cure in a much larger puzzle this disease, and people dedicate their entire lives to it. As a matter of fact, the founder, who is an absolutely amazing woman, her mother currently has Alzheimer's. Her father had Alzheimer's. And it's until you're touched by the passion and the commitment. There's really no words to describe. And again, how could you not want to be part of that? How can you, when you have a knowledge base that can possibly help people, how could I not want to be a part of that, Steve? How could I not want to be involved with such an amazing organization, with such a genuine and sincere a goal, every single day getting up with the end goal of helping people, helping families be saved from going through this. So I really can't say enough about them, and everybody sincerely needs to check them out, and no donation is too small, and check them out on Facebook too. There's a lot of good posts that are up on Facebook. So.
And before we move off this slide, let me just ask you guys a question. If you're listening to this webinar, many of you are people of means, and you can go and give generously, and we thank you for that. But others may be sitting there thinking, well, gosh, I live paycheck to paycheck. I just barely get my bills paid. What can I do? I guess my question for you is, what would you be willing to sacrifice for a little bit? Would you be willing to give up a lunch and maybe take that $7 and give it to the Alzheimer's Cure Foundation? Small sacrifices go noticed, because small sacrifices build great things. The Great Wall of China, you can see it from outer space, was actually built one block at a time that was put in there. So search your heart and say, this is a horrible disease. I want to be a part of the solution. And you can, in whatever way necessary. And they'll appreciate it, and we definitely appreciate it, and I know Danielle appreciates it. So the second question you may be asking yourself, how can I get in contact with Danielle? How can I get a specific plan for me? How can I ask more questions, go more in depth? Well, here it is. You can contact her by email. It is dgiordano@defineyourhealth.com. Or how about a phone number? You can call her direct. You will definitely want to go to her website. It's a great site, has great information, and if you have not liked her Facebook page, you are missing out. You're going to laugh. You're going to be motivated. But most importantly, you are going to be educated. You are going to take control of your health, of your body, of your destiny. This is how you can do it. It's all the tools you need to get healthy and stay healthy and help other people get healthy. And quickly, Danielle, just kind of as I guess sort of a wrap-up, tell us a little more about L-arginine and DHA fats or exercise.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the L-arginine, we talked specifically about L-arginine and the mixture of bringing L-citrinine into it and what that does for endothelial health. Obviously, we know sugar attacks endothelial cells. There's endothelial cells in every single anything that carries blood in your body, your capillaries, your veins, your arteries, and especially in the brain. You have to take care of those endothelial cells. You absolutely have to make them top priority, absolutely top priority. And so I encourage people, and the supplement that we had talked about was Pro-arginine, and people can feel free to reach out to me. I will definitely put them in contact with the right people. This is definitely a supplement, unlike Nordic Naturals, that there's a lot of copycats of. And there's a lot of people that are causing a lot of, how can we say, mischief out there with imposter products and products that don't have the concentration or don't have the purity. And you definitely don't want to be, messing around with amino acids in the wrong dosages or, if they're not mixed correctly. So L-arginine, L-citrulline together, and Pro-arginine. DHA fats, easiest way to sum it up, your brain is made of DHA fats. Period, dot, semicolon, apostrophe, whatever, exclamation point. DHA fats is what your brain is made out of. If you are not getting DHA fats into the diet and you're not getting it, I'm sorry?
She's not calling you a fathead. Don't get offended here, people. She's not saying you're a fathead. She's giving you scientific proof.
That's a compliment. What are you talking about? No, DHA fats, you have got to get DHA fats into the body. There's several different ways that you can get DHA fats in, from hemp seed to walnuts. Undoubtedly, though, cold water fish is definitely the best source to find that. The product that I recommend to people is Nordic Naturals. They are just hands down the purest, third-party tested. They're just amazing, and it is what I take. And I think that's the biggest testament. Is I vet products for months and months and months and months. If anybody knows anything about me, they know the kind of research that I go into. Taking ProArginine, taking Nordic Naturals is something I do every single day. There is not a day that goes past where those two things are not something that I consume. And so DHA fats, remember that the body has a very difficult time synthesizing it. It's EPA fats for the heart healthy, DHA or the brain healthy. They're both good for our purposes, and of course because I have dementia that runs in my family, I pay particular attention to the DHA fats. And then exercise, both on the cardiovascular side and on the anaerobic side, which is what we talked about this evening. You can't just go and just jump on the treadmill and that's the only thing you do. Transversely, you can't just go and lift weights and have that be the only thing you can do. Understand that when you do aerobic exercise, you've got to use the heart rate reserve. You've got to really understand, have something that is tailored specifically for your heart, your ability level, your circulatory system, your oxygen saturation rate, your VO2 max levels. That's what it's about. And remember that anaerobic exercise, again, going back to that very first slide when we talked about volume, mass, endurance, and strength, these are not the same things. You can work the muscle in vastly different ways depending on what the outcome is that you want. Got to watch what you're putting in your mouth, be selective about what you're putting in your mouth, and get up and move that body, Steve. That's the bottom line.
There it is, folks. You heard it. Nothing else needs to be said. Danielle Giordano, thank you so much. Guys, get in contact with her and do me a favor. After you've asked all the questions that you want, just say, put this down here. Say, P.S., tell me about a bike ride and tell me about Route 66. That's all I'm saying. Just ask her about it. It's an amazing story. Guys, thank you so much for your time tonight. I do want to leave you with two cliches. They're kind of cheesy, but they're kind of true. And the first one is this: nothing changes until something changes, and that something is you. If you keep doing what you're doing, you're going to keep getting what you're getting. And if you're sitting here thinking, I need to make a change, what better time than tonight? What better time than tonight? And an old saying I learned back in the 80s, they used to say, if it's going to be, it's up to me. It is up to you. You're more powerful than you think, and you can accomplish amazing things. Danielle, thank you so much for being with us. Folks, thank you for being on tonight. If you missed any part of it, we do have it recorded. We'll get that recording in your hand. And join us again for other topics coming up. We'll keep you posted. Good night, Danielle.
Good night, Steve.
And good night, folks. Thank you for being with us. We'll see you again soon.